Okay, so get this. Think back to where you were when you first saw that video of Neda Agha-Soltan's death. During the Iranian election protests in
The heart
2009.
2009, yeah.
Vivid memory, right?
Right.
Almost everyone remembers. And that's no accident. Today, we are diving into how news coverage of Neda's death, particularly the language used, shaped how we all understood what happened.
Yeah, it's so interesting how those news reports, whether they meant to or not, they acted like a spotlight,
Okay.
choosing what details to highlight and what to just leave in the shadows.
So like a camera lens, kind of focusing your attention.
Exactly. Yeah, and they use this powerful technique. It's called attentional windowing.
Attentional windowing.
Yeah, so think of it like this.
Okay.
You're looking through a window, right? At this big landscape. The window frames a very specific part of that scene. So it's directing your gaze.
Okay.
And news reports, they do the same thing, but they do it with language.
Okay, so it's not just about what happened, it's about what they choose to emphasize.
Exactly.
Okay. Man, I'm already starting to see news differently, and we're like 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
So what kind of things did they focus on in Neda's case?
Well, something as simple as like her clothing.
The clothing.
Yeah, a lot of the reports mentioned she was wearing like jeans, white shoes, a black t-shirt.
Interesting. It seems like such a small detail. Why would that even matter?
Well, because it instantly makes her relatable, it makes her human.
Right.
Like these details, they paint this picture of, just a regular young woman, someone you could know. And it subtly, it amplifies the tragedy because you're not just seeing some nameless face in a crowd.
Right.
You're seeing someone familiar, someone kind of like you.
Wow. That's a clever trick. You're reading about her clothes, but it makes you feel something totally different.
Right.
Like they're playing with your emotions, kind of.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting, even more intriguing. You'd think the word death would be front and center in reports about someone dying.
Well, yeah. I mean, it seems like a pretty important detail.
Right.
Yeah.
And yet the study that we're looking at today, it found that the word death, like the actual word death, is surprisingly rare as the focus of sentences in these articles.
Really?
Yeah, they used a lot of euphemisms, and they use very indirect language. So they'll describe the events leading up to the death in vivid detail, like things like blood pouring or collapsing to the ground.
Right.
But they avoid directly saying Neda died.
It's like they're dancing around the main event. So instead of focusing on the fact that she's gone, they're keeping our attention on the moments before. But why? What's the effect of that? It feels almost disrespectful, like they're tiptoeing around how huge what happened actually is.
Right.
But I guess it also makes you wonder, like, if they're downplaying the death itself, who does that put the focus on?
Yeah.
Is it Neda, or is it the person who shot her?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And it all comes down to how these reports prioritize information. And one way they do this is by using something called the figure ground dynamic.
Okay, figure ground. That sounds familiar, but remind me, is that like an art thing?
It is, yeah. So think about a painting where something really stands out, like a lone figure against this huge landscape.
Yep.
The figure immediately grabs your attention, right? So that's the figure.
Okay.
And then the landscape kind of fades into the background, and that becomes the ground.
Okay, so are you saying that news reports, they're trying to paint Neda as the figure and the shooter as the ground?
It's a little more nuanced than that, but yeah, kind of. So in these articles, Neda's often the grammatical subject, even when the action is done to her.
Wait, what does that even mean? Give me an example.
Okay, sure. Let's say we have two sentences. Neda was shot versus the sniper shot Neda.
Okay.
Same event, right?
Right.
But different focus. So in the first sentence, Neda was shot, Neda is the grammatical subject.
Right.
Which puts her front and center, even though she's the one being acted upon.
Wow, you're right. It really subtly shifts the emphasis, even though both sentences describe the same, like, horrible event.
Exactly. And the research actually supports this. They found a statistically significant difference in how often Neda versus the sniper was the grammatical focus of sentences in the articles.
So even in death, there's this, like, subtle power dynamic at play in how the story is being told, how it's being presented.
Yeah.
Like they're trying to control not just what we know, but how we feel about it,
Exactly. And it gets even more complex when you start to think about the idea of causation. Because it's not always as simple as saying, this person pulled the trigger, therefore they caused this death.
Right. Right. Like you were saying before, there were so many other things going on.
Yeah.
Like the political climate, the chaos in the streets, even just like bad luck, wrong place, wrong time.
Exactly. And the study found that many reports focused really heavily on the immediate physical cause of death, the wound, the blood loss.
Okay.
It's a way of emphasizing the tragic mechanics of what happened.
Yeah.
But at the same time, kind of subtly downplaying the agency of the person who actually pulled the trigger.
It's like saying, this is how she died,
Yeah.
but not really grappling with the why.
Yes.
And depending on what details they choose to emphasize, they can kind of subtly shape how we assign blame,
Yeah.
even without directly stating it.
You hit the nail on the head. It all comes back to this idea of framing. They're choosing what to highlight, what to downplay, and what to just leave unsaid entirely.
Right.
And all of those choices ultimately contribute to the narrative that they're constructing.
It's like they're carefully curating what we see,
Yes.
what we focus on, and ultimately how we understand this whole event.
Yeah.
It's kind of creepy when you really think about it.
It is a little bit, yeah.
But it's not random, right? There's got to be a method to this.
Exactly. And this is where we go beyond just analyzing the language, right? And we start to see the bigger picture. Remember those choices I mentioned? What to highlight, what to downplay, what to leave unsaid. Those choices, they're not made in a vacuum.
So there's a strategy behind it all.
Yeah.
But to what end? What are they trying to get out of this whole subtle manipulation thing?
Ultimately, it's about fitting this event into a broader narrative. It's a specific perspective they want to promote.
Okay.
The researchers behind this study, they call this the cognitive ideological square.
The cognitive ideological square. Okay. You're going to have to break that one down for me.
Okay, so imagine a square. 4 corners.
Yeah.
Each corner represents a different way that news outlets can present information.
Okay.
So they can choose to foreground or background certain details.
Okay.
And they can also choose to, include or omit information entirely.
So it's like they have all these different levers they can pull to shape the story.
Exactly.
You shine a spotlight on some things while others are left lurking in the shadows, totally unseen.
Yes, precisely. And all of this, the highlighting, the downplaying, even just leaving stuff out, it all builds to something.
Right.
It constructs a specific narrative, a very particular way of understanding this event. And it fits a very particular viewpoint, a certain ideology.
So it's not just about reporting the facts. It's about framing them in a way that supports a certain agenda.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which makes you wonder, what were they going for in all this coverage of Neda's death?
Well, let's think about what we've talked about. By focusing on her clothing, they humanize her, they make her relatable.
Right.
By using all those euphemisms, by avoiding the word death, they're softening the blow of the event itself. And then, by making Neda the grammatical focus, even when she's not the one actually acting, they keep her front and center in the narrative. It subtly shifts the attention away from, the agency of the shooter.
Okay, so if I'm putting all this together, they're painting this picture of a senseless tragedy.
Yeah.
That's, struck this innocent young woman. And it's supposed to make you feel sympathetic, outraged even.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily lead you to point any fingers or demand accountability.
Exactly. And that's the power of understanding these techniques. Once you can actually see them in play, you can start to question these narratives. You can start asking yourself, why are they choosing to emphasize these very specific details?
Right.
What are they leaving out of this story and why?
It's like we've unlocked some kind of secret code to understanding how the news is actually made. We see the brushstrokes, all the little decisions that shape how we see these events.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a little empowering and also kind of terrifying.
I totally agree. Yeah. And it's impossible to be totally objective, but when you're aware of these techniques, you become a more critical consumer of information.
Right.
You can question the narratives that you see. You can seek out multiple perspectives. And in the end, you can hopefully come to your own, more informed conclusions.
Yeah. It's a good reminder that there's always more to the story than what's right there on the surface.
For sure.
And sometimes the most important information is what's not being said.
Definitely.
Well, that's a powerful thought to end on today.
Yeah.
So next time you're scrolling through the headlines, remember this deep dive. Remember Neda. The news you read, the stories you see, they've all been carefully put together to guide your attention. But now you have the tools to start questioning that narrative, to look beyond the surface and find that deeper meaning that's hidden within the words.